Hey everyone, James from TeaDB here, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. So today I am going to talk a little bit about seasonal drinking, what makes you choose, or what makes me choose a tea that I'm going to drink for the day. Usually my normal schedule is to drink a little bit of ripe in the morning with my wife, using this big blue pot. So that's a pretty regular occurrence. And then I'll usually pick one tea that I'm going to drink sort of throughout the day. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what causes me to choose that. A lot of people, or some people, have asked about sort of seasonal drinking, what I drink throughout the year. So I'm going to talk I'm filming this in mid-November now, so we're definitely in fall. Here in Seattle, I guess October is really when the weather starts to change. September is still pretty warm around here. October, November, the temperature drops a fair amount. We don't have the extreme weather of other places in this country, but it does change quite a bit, so it can be a little bit of a shock to the system. Talk a little bit about how that might affect the teas that I choose to drink. Some people are very, very seasonal drinkers, and they'll sort of shift their lineup completely. Kind of the general trend that people tend to do is they tend to shift over more towards fermented and darker teas, such as ripe pu'erh, or like more traditionally stored pu'erh during the colder months, and then maybe during the warmer months, they'll be more agreeable to like really fresh tea. So like green oolong, even green tea, white tea, and that sort of thing. And that can also line up pretty nicely for when like spring harvest comes in and you start to get those teas right when the weather starts to warm up. For me, I don't shift so dramatically. So for instance, ripe pu'erh is probably a tea that a lot of people, maybe especially someone like Denny, thinks of as like a really darker month, cold month brew. And I can totally see why. I mean, it's dark, it's warming, it's very comforting, it's pretty easy to brew too. But for me, ripe pu'erh fits into my sort of tea drinking habits just year round. So that for me is something that I'm just going to be drinking all the year round. That being said, I wouldn't say that my tea drinking and what I choose to drink is 100% the same in summer as it is in winter. I think in general, if I'm ever going to drink Yangsheng or really, really green oolong, it's almost always in the summer or perhaps in the spring. If it's the wintertime, I just really don't feel like drinking those teas. So I'd say maybe for myself, I'd shift maybe like 20% to 30% darker on average. There's a couple shungs that are semi-aged that I have that I brought on to recent Inbetweenisodes that, I think I would tend to brew those more in the summer months just because they are a tinge greener. It's not necessarily totally age dependent because storage plays a pretty major factor in sort of when teas really turn that corner, turning towards darker. So things like the 2009 Yongda Da Shuishan that I got from Fine Pu'erh years ago, that to me is a tea that came to me, relatively green. It's aged just a little bit, and it's still, on the greener side of the Shang Pu'erh that I do own. So that's a tea that I would classify more as a summertime brew. Doesn't mean I won't ever brew it during winter, but I might tend to brew it then. Also, the 2003 Bai Cha Tong that had been stored in Wenatchee, Washington. That tea is 17 years old now, but the storage on it is just green enough that for me, I classify it closer to something like that 2009 Yongda It's green enough that I might drink it a little bit less during the fall and winter. And there are other teas like the Love Forever Paper Tong or 2006 8582 that I can just about drink year round. So my tea drinking doesn't shift totally dramatically, but it does change a little bit. Things like Yancha, I can drink also year round, and I tend to drink year round. But High Mountain Oolong, something like Shanli Shi from Tihom, maybe that's more of a summer brew for me. So the second half of this episode, going to be bringing on one of my favorite brews, and I checked my drinking logs, which I've been keeping for a few years now, just to see when I do drink this tea. And as I suspected, I do tend to sort of crave this tea more in the fall and the winter time. And it's one of my favorites here, the 2003 Wistaria Qingteng, really unique tea. Just a couple other things that I wanted to mention as far as like just kind of miscellaneous off on the side things is Pu'erh does tend to be a little more aromatic in the summer months, so that could also play a role into wanting to do it. I think that's just generally because the heat and the humidity, especially in the West, where we're not always at 80 degrees in here, I think that just sort of raises the senses and raises, in the same sense that if you store Pu'erh in hotter and more humid conditions, it gives off more of an aroma. The last thing is that one other factor that I think really does tend to play a factor in the teas that I choose to drink is just sort of the strength of it. Sometimes in the morning you just need or want something that's stronger, that's really going to get you going in the morning. So for me, maybe that would lean me more towards a factory type Pu'erh, or maybe something that's even a little stronger, got a greener edge to it. That's also a major factor in sort of deciding what I'm going to brew in the morning. Okay, let's move on to the Wistaria Qingteng. Alright, so I brought this tea on to an episode I filmed in Taiwan years ago at this point. I think it's 4.5 years ago. This tea, I bought it in Wistaria Tea House in Taiwan. Great place. Brought a couple of their teas on earlier. You can actually buy their tea online. This is definitely a tea that I do really enjoy and recommend. I own a few cakes of it. So it's the Qingteng. It's from 2003. From Mungsong material, and I think it's really unique. I've never ran into a tea that's quite like this. It's just a really unique tea. Probably the most obvious thing that you'll just notice first off the bat if you try this tea, it's got a really unique aroma, which is fascinating because you'd think that the tea would kind of share a similar aroma to a lot of the other Wistaria teas. For me, I find that it's actually quite distinct. Some have actually described, personally I don't get this, a toro or sort of like tuna slight fishiness to this tea. I don't get that. I can kind of get this. For me, this tea is just really incredibly aromatic. I describe it more as very perfume-like. But yeah, it's definitely what you'll notice. You can smell that off of the just the dry cake, and then you can smell it certainly when you are brewing the tea. This is steep number 3 and 4 right here. So sort of getting a light red, orangish red. Cheers. So it's not totally soft, but it's on the softer side of things. There's a mild bitterness that runs through this that's not overpowering at all. So the bitterness is very easy to take in, but definitely does identify itself as a sheng. You can sort of taste a little bit of that really aromatic perfuminess to it. I'd say it's the overall profile of it is predominantly woody. Bahandi is maybe medium, maybe even medium light to it. One thing that you really get going is just the sweetness, the huigan of this is really, really nice. It's just sort of like coats the mouth. The bitterness dissipates pretty quickly. So gonna keep moving here. Steep number 4. So some minerals. This one's a little sweeter than the previous one. Gonna do another steep right here. So this would be steep number 5. Working on. I'm using about 6 grams for a 95 milliliter Yixing teapot. I'd say this is pretty darn typical of how I brew a lot of my semi-aged sheng to begin with. Yeah, the feeling on this tea is really good. It's also just incredibly warming, so incredibly comfortable to drink. And I think the warming nature of this tea is probably why it's just kind of a tea that I really love to brew around this time of year. It's, I think, 43, 44 degrees Fahrenheit outside, which it's colder than summer. I'm not going to say that's super cold, because there are many people in this country that live in much, much colder conditions throughout the year, but that's colder than summer. So the contrast, you really do feel it this time of year. So and it's appealing in a way that teas that sort of have like a cooler nature, so greener teas in general, just don't really have that sort of characteristic. So for me, the sort of like comforting, warming, sort of like a warm blanket feel of this tea is just really, really nice to have. Wistaria tea is not the longest lasting of teas, but they are really nice and really, really good while they do go. Cheers. Yeah, and the final thing I wanted to say about this tea, and I avoided talking about it until now just because I wanted to sort of let it settle in, is the depth and the energy of this tea are just really, really outstanding. It just feels really, really good to drink this tea. So, wholeheartedly recommend this tea if you are okay to buy online. I've had some success, if you do have questions, messaging them on email or on Instagram. Very helpful. I hope they're doing okay as a business. I know it's kind of a tough time right now for brick and mortar shops. Not really totally sure how the situation is in Taiwan. It's probably a lot better than here in Seattle, but nevertheless, it's good to sort of support these shops. I know they do rely a fair amount on, or they do have a fair amount of tourists that come in and check them out. So hopefully people can go check out Wistaria and travel there at some time in the future. But I definitely recommend buying this tea if you think it sounds interesting. I think it costs a couple $100 now, so it's not a cheap tea by any means. But if you're looking for a 50-60 cent gram of tea, I think this is well worthwhile, and I think it compares well with the alternatives. So yeah, just getting a lot more of those minerals, that grain, the woodiness, just sort of that really good profile. I'd say the real standouts of this tea are the aftertaste, the feeling, and the energy of it. Okay, so going to give this a 7.7 rating. I suspect, I gave the Zipin from 2003 a 7.3 rating. I suspect a lot of people will prefer that tea over this one. For me, this tea tends to check off just a little bit more of my own personal preference boxes. So, rating is certainly subjective, and that's what I give it. I think that's a solidly high rating, and I do think this tea deserves it. So thank you all for tuning in. Let me know what you guys drink during the, or what you all drink during the fall and winter months, and how that might differ from your normal. Do you switch your tea lineup completely, or is it just by a little bit, or do you just drink the same stuff year round? I think everyone tends to drink what they crave. But I do think people will have generally different cravings throughout the year. Just kind of how you might want a warmer, you might tend to have more soup during the colder months than you do during the warmer ones, or maybe not. So let me know how y'all change up those things, and hit the thumbs up if you like this video. Subscribe below. I'm going to be releasing more Inbetweenisodes. Apologize for the slow trickle of normal episodes that we get. We're just trying to be very cautious out here in terms of getting together and filming, especially with a lot of coronavirus cases spiking in this area, just in the whole Western world right now, in the middle of November. So thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you all next time. Cheers.